Hello, this video is for those of you who are planning on buying a laptop before or during your architectural education. I will not be giving you a list of precise models that you should buy because those tend to, change over time, but rather I will do my best to cover all things that you should consider and also which parameters you should pay more attention to. So the first question to answer is always PC or a laptop. And for a student, I always suggest a laptop simply because it's portable. I suggest a laptop. And this video is about purchasing a laptop. The second most popular question that students tend to have is, should they buy a Windows laptop or a MacBook, right? And the answer to that is pretty straightforward: a Windows laptop. Not to say that you can't do the work on a MacBook, of course you can, it's just that there are certain software packages, for instance Autodesk Revit, that don't work on a Mac, right? Or rather, they work on a Mac, they don't work on Mac OS, which is an operating system of a Mac, just like Windows is an operating system of Windows-based laptops, right? It is possible to run Windows on a MacBook, so you can have Mac OS as well as Windows running both on a MacBook, and in doing so you can run all of those software packages that can't run on Mac OS still on a MacBook by just loading into Windows first, and it's a little bit of a hassle to set up, at least for the first time. So my suggestion is always just get a Windows laptop. Also, they are quite a bit cheaper for the same performance. These days, if you hear that, oh, the screens on Macs are better or something else, no, they're not. They're just not. Anyway, so a Windows laptop. So the third, I guess, question is a type of a Windows laptop, right? Because those come in different shapes and sizes. You have ultrabooks, you have workstations, gaming laptops, media laptops, business laptops, which are basically ultrabooks, and so on, right? So just to cover the most popular ones, ultrabooks are light and thin and ultra portable, thus the name ultrabook, and usually they are loud. If something is light and thin and powerful, it's going to be loud and hot, right? That's the trade-off. Which brings us, I guess, to point 2, which is workstations. Workstations are aimed at highest possible performance, right? So their cooling is great. They're quite quiet with it as well, but they're heavy. They're really heavy. And there are some workstations that are kind of more tailored towards CAD design, architecture, and so on. And there are other workstations that are tailored towards data science and crunching really large numbers and whatnot. If you find a workstation that has a pretty beefy graphics card, that means it's probably a design-oriented workstation laptop. These I do suggest to look into, but with a caveat: only used ones. The new workstations, they're aimed at these large companies, large businesses, and they're really expensive, but their price drops drastically over time. I'll talk much more about this, but basically workstations are workhorses and they are really expensive at the start, and then if you're buying used, you can get a really good deal with them. They're heavy, they're not so loud, they're reliant, right? Then we have gaming laptops. For budget, for architectural students, those are the go-to laptops that I suggest because they offer the best performance in terms of 3D modeling and so on, because games need that. Games need those strong graphics cards and so on, right? So gaming laptops are great because they're also made to be cheap. So the trade-off for them is usually they look horrible. The aesthetic is just, you don't really want to carry it into a meeting. They have like lights everywhere and so on. They're made out of cheap materials, so a lot of creaking, a lot of plastics and so on. Usually gaming laptops have really poor screens, really horrible color accuracy and so on. And what else is there? Well, nothing else, honestly. I mean, just the build quality and the screens are usually horrible. Everything, and they look bad. Everything else is great. So if you're on a tight budget and you really want a new computer, then definitely start looking into gaming laptops, with that gaming aesthetic. And then we have media laptops. Media laptops are basically usually are too weak for architectural design, right? Because they don't have a proper graphics card. Right? They usually have an integrated graphics card, meaning that I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but a processor also does the heavy lifting, kinda oversimplifying this, but also does a heavy lifting of the graphics, while a gaming laptop has a separate chip that deals with the graphics, as well as workstation and usually most of the ultrabooks, right? And then you have the business laptop, which I'm placed at the end because I want to distinguish between an ultrabook and a business laptop. A business laptop is lightweight, it's thin, but it's not loud. Why is that? And that's because it's really not that powerful, right? So business laptops are used for Excel and emails and so on, and they have really nice aesthetic, and they look beautiful. Usually they come with a nice stylus, like a pencil with which you can draw on top of the laptop and so on, right? But they have zero power, right? Which means that you can't really do any proper 3D modeling with them, and you should steer away from them. So what did we learn? Ultrabooks are okay if you get a powerful one and you're ready to, for the laptop to be boiling hot and loud. If you're fine with that, then ultrabooks are fine. Workstations, heavy and expensive if bought new. Gaming laptops, usually cheaper, but cheaper materials as well, and poor screens. Okay. So now, everything else, don't even look at it. Now, when you know that these three types, right, that you should aim for, let's look at the actual components of the laptops, because those, are what's important. All right, so as an architecture student, these are the main 4 components that you should look into. Not to say that there are only 4 that laptops have, but these are the 4 that actually make a difference. The components are GPU, which is graphics card. Second, RAM, temporary memory, very important. Third, CPU, which is a processor. Processor is shortened into CPU, very important. 4, screen. Of course, you want it to be color accurate. But I will talk, there's a caveat, I'll talk about that a little bit more once we get to it. 5th, honorable mention, I guess, is the storage, the hard disk, or in this case, the SSD, right? You want to have enough storage, but that is very easily either upgradable, or you can just have an external hard disk that you plug into your computer, right? That's what I would suggest, for all of the nice 3D models and whatever. So let's begin with the GPU, the graphics card. There are 3 main companies that build GPUs for laptops. Only 3 companies in the world, not main, only 3 companies. You have Intel, you have NVIDIA, and you have AMD, right? So let's start with Intel because that's an easy no. So Intel is a newcomer into this whole GPU market, and they only have like just a few graphics cards that they have built. And there are laptops with Intel's graphics cards, Intel Arc. Don't buy a laptop with an Intel graphics card. Half of your stuff will not work. Then you have AMD. AMD is fine. They have been in the business for a long time, building graphics cards. But the problem is that they have a very small market share compared to NVIDIA. What does that mean? NVIDIA basically owns 90% of the laptops. They are building graphics cards for 90% of the laptops, and NVIDIA is like 10%. Numbers might be wrong, but you get the idea. What happens is that then NVIDIA's laptops or graphics cards receive updates a little bit later because they're not a priority, right? And all of the software, all of the programs that are built, they're more tailored to work faster and more reliably with NVIDIA graphics cards, right? So in this case, it's better to, give in to the monopoly of NVIDIA and actually get a laptop which has an NVIDIA graphics card. It's just more reliable that way, right? So choose NVIDIA. Then the question is, what type of a graphics card? There are two types, RTX and Quadro graphics cards from NVIDIA. RTX means a gaming graphics card, Quadro means workstation graphics card. The difference between them is basically that Quadros they're more stable, so they crash less, and they have much more internal memory, so they can crunch much larger numbers, they can contain much more data inside of them compared to the gaming graphics cards. I can't stress this enough. If you're buying a new laptop, don't even look at Quadro cards. Those are going to be really expensive, and usually you will get only the budget version of the Quadro cards, while for the gaming cards, anything that starts with an RTX, you're going to get a much better deal, much more performance, right? So new laptops, always RTX, the graphics card starts with RTX. Used laptops, either RTX or Quadro. At that point, Quadros are pretty good, but I'll cover the used laptop market later down the line in this video. So let me break down the name of a graphics card from NVIDIA, specifically, RTX, right? At first you have, the RTX, ray tracing extravaganza, ray tracing, right? That means that the graphics card is really good at tracing how any kind of either light ray or sightline ray, whatever, bounces around the scene. That's the most basic explanation that I can give you. Then you have a number that is usually either 2070 or 3080. In this example, I'm using 4060. What does that mean? 4, 3, or 2 at the start, the first number is the generation. The higher the number, the newer the graphics card is. Usually graphics cards, they're made every few years, right? So we're currently at the 4th generation of RTX graphics cards. So if you see the number 4, that means, it's the newest one. 5 will come probably in 2026 or late in 2025. So it's going to be 5,000 years. Anyway, so 4,000 is the newest one, 3,000 is a few years older, and 2,000 is like 5 years older, right? Then you have this kind of a either 60, 50, 40, 60, 40, 50, 40, 70, 40, 80, or 40, 90. This is basically like class, like level, how powerful is the graphics card. So I can give you an example of RTX 2080, the second generation, but at the end you have 80, is more powerful than RTX 4060. In some cases, in most cases, right? So that's just simply because it's 2080 is an older graphics card, but it's of the highest class of that particular year, while 4060 is the newest card, but it's of the lowest class, right? So it's like an old Mustang versus a new Toyota Prius, right? So as an architect, what you want to search for is, as long as you see a 40 at the start, any number after that is fine. The newest graphics cards, they're quite powerful, they're quite fast, so anything after 40, that is fine. If you see 30, then I strongly suggest either getting a 3070 or 3080 or 3090, right? So skipping 3050. 3060 is an edge case. It might work out. And when I say what I suggest is, it means that I'm always thinking about the 6 years of your education. Will the laptop be enough for the whole 6 years? Or 5 years. I mean, 6 years if you're doing an internship. Anyway, so will the laptop be enough for you to, you buy it before you start and it still serves you perfectly fine, when you're finishing your master's? So back to 3060 is kind of an edge case in that way, right? And then second generation, RTX 2060, 2070, 2080, right? I only suggest 2080, right? So 60 and 70, you don't look at those because those will become weaker and weaker, over time. So I of course I'll have graphics here, so maybe the graphics will make sense a little bit more. So that is, also at the end, sorry, almost forgot. At the end of the graphics card name, you might see either RTX 4060 Super or RTX 4060 Ti. Super means is just, it's still a Prius, but your Prius has a spoiler on it. It goes just a little bit faster. It might have a little bit more memory or anything like that, right? And then Ti is basically, it's a Prius, but the engine has been upgraded, right? So it does go quite fast, and it's almost, 4060 Ti is almost at the level of 4070. So it's reaching that limit at which you would just give it another class, right? So keep that in mind. Super and Ti, those are like upgrades to the initial graphics card. Okay, let's move on to RAM. Up until this year, I have been suggesting students that they have 16 gigabytes of RAM. This is not the case anymore. First of all, RAM is temporary memory. It's not storage. It's not memory which, you store, let's say, a image or a video file for a long time on your computer. It's not that. It's basically when you're 3D modeling or you're doing some Photoshop work or whatever, you're creating something. There's a lot of data that the computer needs to hold in this really, really fast temporary memory, and it fetches that data and brings it to you the moment you need it, right? So that's the temporary memory. And as times progress, we need more and more of that temporary memory simply because the images that we work with have higher resolution. The models that we work with have more information in them. Windows 11 uses more temporary memory than Windows 10, and Windows 10 uses more than Windows 8, and so on, right? So it just keeps increasing. So now my suggestion, I am bumping up my suggestion, and I'm suggesting 32 gigabytes of temporary memory of RAM, RAM, at the minimum, right, for you. Thankfully, it's not expensive, right? It's not expensive to buy it, so or to find a laptop with that 32 gigabytes of RAM, but that's going to go a long way for you. So that's that. Or should you get 48 or 64? Sure, if it's possible, get as much as you can, right? But 32 should be enough to get you through all 6 years of your education. Let's move on to CPUs, to processors. So again, with the CPUs, just like with the GPUs, you have I will be covering the companies. First of all, the companies that build them. We have Intel, AMD, and Qualcomm, right? So Intel and AMD, you're already familiar because they also build graphics cards, but Qualcomm is a newcomer, right? So first of all, don't buy a laptop that has a Qualcomm CPU, simply because most of the software that we use still does not work on Qualcomm CPUs. Maybe in 5 years things will change, and I really hope that they do, because Qualcomm seems to be doing pretty good processors, which is, by the way, I shouldn't mention, processor is like a brain of the machine, right? It's responsible for precise calculation of very specific, numbers, I guess, right? So Qualcomm in the future, probably very good. Right now, very bad. Don't buy. Intel or AMD, both are fine, right? Other two alternatives, Intel or AMD. Stable processors, works on like every software, every program that we use works on them. So you just choose either one of them. It doesn't matter which one. I'll start with Intel and I'll break down the name of the CPU, which this year is a little bit trickier because the current generation, the newest ones, they changed their goddamn names, the naming convention of how they're named. So first of all, I'll cover all of the previous names or the previous convention of how they were named, and then I'll tell you about the changes that were made. So you have Intel Core i9 processor 14900K. Of course, Intel Core, that means it's made by Intel, easy. Then you have i9. i9 is the class. i9 is the highest class of performance. You have i9, i7, i5, and i3. So 3 you don't buy. It's too weak. 5, 7, or 9 are all fine. Keep in mind, 9 tends to get really hot, so if you see i9 in an ultra-light notebook or laptop, don't. It's going to be a furnace. It's going to be way too hot for it. Anyway, so we have i9 processor, which means that is the highest class. Then we have 14900. 14,000 means it's 14th generation, right? So you might see 8,000, that means 8th generation. You might see 10,000, that means 10th generation, and so on. Usually the generations, they go every year for Intel, right? So 14,000 means, the difference between 14,000 and 8,000 is going to be 6 years. Then you have 900. In this case, you should ignore this number. It doesn't really matter as much. It's a different type of a class system, and it really does not, or SKU, I think. Anyway, it really doesn't matter for the performance, so you just ignore it altogether. What matters, though, is the letter at the end. The only letters that you should really consider buying, or CPUs with those letters that you should consider buying, is HX, HK, or H. They are all high performance CPUs, meaning performance is at the top priority. There is going to be a lot of laptops that you will see that will have a U or a P. Those are a no-go. U means ultra low voltage, which just basically says this CPU has extreme limits on the power consumption, which makes it much weaker, right? So what you want is HX, HK, or H, right? So that's the Intel CPU up until literally like April of this year, and then they changed it. So now with the whole AI shenanigan, they are making a new line of these processors that are called Core Ultra, Intel Core Ultra 9 processor 185H, right? So there's Ultra 3, Ultra 5, Ultra 7, Ultra 9, just like 9, 5, 7, 3, right? The class. So still you don't look at Ultra 3, you get 9, 7, or 5. And then 185 means it's the first generation of these ultra processors. So it starts with a 185. I think it can either be 80 or 85. And if it's 80, then it's a little bit lower class. It doesn't matter, right? What matters is it 9, 7, or 5? And then you have the HX, H, HK. So get the one with the H, right? That's going to be a high performance one. Okay, so that's Intel. Simple. Then we have AMD. AMD, basically the naming convention is quite similar, and AMD, just like Intel, made my life much harder because also in April they decided to also change their naming convention. So let's do this again with AMD. Older, well, not so old, but a little bit older CPUs all have a name of AMD Ryzen, then a variable number, Ryzen 9, 7, 5, or 3, just like Intel i9, i7, i5, i3, thank God. And then we have 8945HS. Okay, so again, 9, 7, and 5, Ryzen 9, Ryzen 7, Ryzen 5, all are fine. Ryzen 3, too weak, don't look at it. 8945. 8 is 8th generation. 945 is the SKU, we don't look at those. And then we have HS, right? And generation, as per usual, higher number, better generation, or newer generation, meaning better processor. Letters at the end. HS is aimed at gaming and creators. HX is aimed at maximum performance. So get either one of those. And now for the newest naming convention of AMDs, you have AMD Ryzen AI 9, 7, 5, or 3, HX 370, right? Which is just weird. So out of all of this, the number, the 9, is the most important one. You know, so you want either 9, 7, or 5. You don't want a 3. That's the name of the game. When buying a processor, you don't want a 3. And you don't want for Intel U or P, because those are ultra low voltage processors. That's it. Simple as that. Okay, let's move on to the screen. So when it comes down to laptop screens, you want it to be bright and you want it to be color accurate. Those are the two main things. You don't care about refresh rate, you know, how fast it is, 60 frames per second. So meaning it updates the image 60 times per second is absolutely fine for a creator, you know, for someone that does 3D modeling or Photoshop work. I always suggest getting an external monitor, right? To purchase an external monitor, a bigger one, and just having it in the studio, and when you go to the studio you just connect your laptop to it and you have a big monitor. Not just the monitor, by the way, a keyboard, very important, and a mouse, the most important thing. I have noticed so many students, at least in the past, recently I've been yelling at them, so they have been a little bit more compliant about this, but that come in and try to 3D model without a mouse, or draw CAD drawings without a mouse, and that is absolutely psychotic to me. Because the speed at which you do the work drops down to like 1/5 of how fast you could go if you were to use a mouse, and then the students just tend to, you know, stay behind and, you know, not do great work. And also when the teachers come in to help out with 3D modeling, they cannot, because student just brings in the laptop and says, can you help with modeling this? And all they can offer is a touchpad. I'm not touching that. No one is touching that. You know, you need a mouse. Anyway, sorry, that was a rant in itself. But we're talking about screens and external monitors. So when it comes down to a laptop screen, you're looking at nits. Nits is basically the brightness. And what you want is you want a laptop monitor not to be below 350 nits of brightness. Anything below that means that you will be struggling with daylight quite a bit, right? So 350 nits of brightness. And then for the type of a monitor or a screen, a laptop screen, you want either mini LED, OLED, IPS panel, or let me say, you don't want a VA panel. VA is old technology and it's horrible. I don't even know if they make laptops with VA anymore, but if they do, you should run away from them. With that being said, again, I'm coming back to the idea of you do need an external monitor, right? To purchase. And I think this will bring us into an Excel spreadsheet that I will put in the below in the description of the video for you to check out, where I have selected a few laptops, a few monitors as examples of what I would consider a decent deal, especially if you're buying online. So let me open that one up. Alright, so in this Excel spreadsheet, what you'll see are these three main tables, as well as an additional kind of resource, but I'll cover the resource in just a second. So the first one is the laptops that I just went to Amazon and just fished out a few of these creator-oriented or designer-oriented laptops that are a little bit more expensive because of that, because they are designer-oriented, but I know for a fact that their screens are pretty good, they're color accurate, and that they are built to to last, right? To last you at least until the end of your education cycle. Then we have monitors. All of these monitors are the ones that I suggest you buy. The cheapest one being $176. So by the way, this is with, shipping is quite expensive if you're buying it from America, and these are the prices of if I were to buy it in Sweden, right? But ship it from America. So the shipping is quite expensive in this case. But if you were to just search for these kind of monitors in a Swedish market, for example, you would get them, without the shipping costs. So you would get them for $176, which is like 1,800 crowns, something like that. Anyway, all of the monitors are, I'm starting with the monitors. All of them are Pro Art line made by Asus, and they are great in terms of color accuracy. They're excellent. You can see delta E of less than 2, which means that they're amazing for that. Then you have brightness. These two have 350 nits of brightness, which is sufficient, and these are a little bit higher, 400 nits, which just makes it, the bright areas pop a little bit more. I don't really see any, I mean, this one is 245, which is not that bad. So, oh, sorry, that's the shipping. I'm being stupid. 305. Which is a little bit, it's getting a little bit expensive. So I would suggest, if you're on a tight budget, just getting the cheapest one. It's going to be a huge difference, going to make a huge difference in the quality of your work. Then we have the resolution. This is basically just how many pixels there are crammed in. For some reason, this one I didn't write an X. There we go. And all of the resolutions here are sufficient. If you see 1920 by 1080 and it's like 27 inches in not diameter, like across, then it's a little bit too low of a resolution. But since this is 24 inches, which is a little bit smaller of a monitor, this is completely fine, right? So links are here to check them out. And then if you're buying it from Europe or from Sweden, I suggest just looking at your local stores. Also, you could check, maybe there are some good deals where for your particular location the shipping is actually much lower than what was for me. I sometimes notice that there is indeed free shipping, if you're just checking out the links there. Anyway, so those are the monitors. That's the only lineup that I suggest looking into, because they offer pretty good budget versions of their professional grade monitors. Then for the laptops themselves, let me come back to this. Just like with the monitors, Pro Art lineup, Asus also has Pro Art laptops, which are excellent in their build quality, they're excellent in their screens, and they're pretty good in their overall performance. The problem with them is that they're pretty damn expensive. You can see $3,000. This is, by the way, in dollars, right? So $3,000 for a really powerful one. So 3080 third generation class 80 Ti, meaning the highest possible class graphics card, 12th generation i7 processor. So i7 is like the second highest class processor, 32 gigs of RAM. You can see that here everything is 32 gigs of RAM. With the price of 3,000. I believe this is the most expensive one, right? Yeah, it is. And basically you have all of these options here. Where you will see RTX 5000. No, that is not a 5th generation laptop. No, that is whatchamacallit, a quadro card. Remember the one that I said not to buy a cheap one? Not to buy a new one, a laptop with a new quadro card. This is a new laptop with a quadro card that I'm suggesting that you buy, that you might buy, you might look into it, simply because it was a pretty good deal. The price is not outrageous, and it just seems to be pretty nice. Then we have an outlier here with the price of $885, which is like what, 9,000 crowns. The ZBook Studio 16 from HP, and everything here seems to be fine, except that there's this A1000. A1000 means, if I scroll down here, it is a quadro card, meaning it's a workstation card. And then if I just look through all of these like this table right here, I can find A1000 right here, which means that it's, if this is today's equivalent of these quadro cards, that means that A1000 is one generation before that. So it's the same thing as us looking at RTX 40,000 graphics card and comparing it with RTX 30 or 3000 graphics card, right? So A1000 is right here, and you can see that it's in a pretty low range. So it's low tier graphics card. But I mean, for the price of $885, this is still pretty usable. And this, even being pretty low tier graphics card, would be sufficient to get you through all 6 years of your 5 years of your education, right? So that's why I'm getting it in here. Also, plenty of RAM, pretty good processor, and pretty big IPS panel, right? So that's an outlier. Everything else is a little bit more expensive. This Dell right here is a laptop that I used before I upgraded this year, and this Dell did really well in terms of performance, but it was constantly at 95 degrees Celsius of temperature because it is a lightweight laptop. Keep that in mind. Okay, I'll stop talking about that. All of these are pretty good creator-oriented laptops that you can check out on your own time. Let's move on to a used laptop market. Okay, so these laptops that you see here are from a Swedish used laptop market, from actually 2 marketplaces that I found. And the reason why I'm not doing international is because every country has its own used laptop shops that you need to investigate by yourselves. But in this case, I just wanted to put it out there that neither one of the laptops that I found in 2 of the pretty big marketplaces has an RTX an RTX GPU, the gaming GPU, like RTX 4060 or 3050. All of these are quadro cards. All of these are workstation cards. And I just want to explain the mindset. The mindset that you should have is that there are these large companies that buy workstations in bulk. They buy hundreds of them, right? And then after 3 or 4 years, they upgrade, right? Meaning that they buy another batch of the newest workstations while they push out the old batch onto these kind of companies, right, that resell them, and they resell them at an insane discount, right? So for instance, this HP ZBook 17 G5 is selling at 13,000 crowns, which is going to be like, you can just do $1,300, probably inaccurate, but around that ballpark, right? If you were to buy this new, like 5 years ago, that would be much closer to 60,000 crowns or $6,000, right? So the price diminishes insanely for workstations, and you need to, as a student, I would strongly suggest making use of that, right? So how do you choose an old, not so old workstation? Well, the first thing that you do is you look at the CPU to determine how old exactly is it, right? Because the CPU, all of these are Intel CPUs, clearly. Oh, actually, do we have any AMD? Oh, no. All of these are just Intel. i7, i9, blah, blah, blah. If you were to see AMD, you would see Ryzen 7, Ryzen 9. So in this case, all of these are Intel. You look at the generation, right? So 8th generation, 9th generation, 10th generation, and we don't have 11th, right? So the newest ones are the 10th generation CPUs, which means they're like 3-4 years old, which is absolutely fine, right? 3 years old laptop is really okay, not a problem whatsoever. And 8 would be 5 years old laptop, or 5 to 6 years old laptop, which already is a little bit, it's getting there. It's getting older, but still pretty decent, right? Then, of course, all of them have 32 gigs of RAM, as I said, that it's needed, except this one, which has 64 gigs of RAM, but of course the price also kind of dictates that. I have made things, areas that are a little bit more interesting, or up to par or above the bar, a little bit brighter, and also the good deals, I also made them a bit brighter in this table. So then when you look at GPUs, you look at the table, and first thing that you do is, okay, P3200, how old is that? So it's not this, it's not this, it's this. Okay, so we're basically doing 3 generations before today's modern GPU, which is a little bit old, just like the processor, right? So you have to keep that in mind. But then the next thing that you do is you check, okay, how high up the class, the bracket is it, right? So it's right at 3000, right? So Quadro P3000 means that it's a pretty powerful GPU. I mean, there's only 2 classes above it. So this would still hold up, in my opinion. So P3200 are absolutely fine GPUs, even though they are quite old. Then here we have RTX 3000, which we also go back in here and we see that, okay, it's 1 generation newer. It's right here. RTX 3000 GPUs, absolutely fine, absolutely usable, right? Right below it, we have T2000, which is, same generation, but 1 class lower. And I would argue that T2000 and P3200 are quite similar in their performance, right? So you can look at it that way as well. So these are still fine. Then we have RTX 5000, which is basically, okay, it is 2 generations lower, but it is right at the top, right? It's the highest possible, quality, not quality, but performance GPU that you can get. Okay, so moving on, basically you have a list here of these possibilities that you can get, and of course the list will change and probably has already changed, so I will be updating this once or twice, but afterwards you will need to find find the used laptops on your own if you're into searching for that. Just finishing up here, this powerful graphics card and pretty low price means that there was something wrong with the laptop itself, and it was basically that it didn't have enough storage. It had very little internal storage for actual movies and whatnot, or programs to be installed. So here I wrote that needs an SSD, which is a hard disk added. Easy process. Any kind of laptop repair shop can do it, and it costs around $200. So it's actually this would be around 11,000 crowns rather than 8,750. Okay. So that's that. That's the used market. As I said before, any or every country has one, and you should definitely, scour it if you want to get a pretty damn good performance for with a low budget. And while we're still on the subject of used market, of course there's eBay. The biggest place where you can find used laptops. Of course, in Sweden you have Blocket.se and so on, but this is international. You can search from anywhere in the world. And the way I search for used laptops is I go to eBay, I go to laptops and netbooks, PC, laptops and netbooks, go here, right? Shop by RAM size, I do 32 gigabytes. Shop by screen size, I really don't care about the size of the screen as long as it's above 13 inches. So anything like 14, 16 or 15, all of these are fine, but I will not be using them. And then I just start scouring, right? But before I kind of do that, I go a little bit down here, and while this is like user-friendly area, here it's a little bit more nerdy, but gives you a little bit more of a flexibility in how you search. So here I can choose, instead of 32 or just 32, I can say actually 32 and 64 gigabytes of RAM are fine for me. And all of those are just wrong. Yeah, like there's no laptop that has 128 gigabytes of RAM that you buy on eBay and not get scammed. So either 62 or 64 or 32. Then for screen size, I will go 14, sure. Again, 15. I hate that it updates every time I change it, but it is what it is. And then 16. Yeah, that's good. Then for processor, I could, start going through the processors here, but let's just ignore that because there's too many tick marks to add. Operating system, we search for Windows, and there's so many Windows operating systems that we do not add them in. Condition, don't care. Brand, really don't care. Price, actually price, that's weird that they don't give us a better price than this, higher price than this, but whatever. And instead of all listings, we don't do auctions, we buy it now. So we go to buy it now part, and then you just start going through it slowly. So for instance, this bad boy right here, $860 plus $100 shipping, so $1,000. Lenovo Legion Slim 5 Ryzen 7 processor, RTX 4060 with 32 gigabytes of RAM. That seems to be pretty fine, right? We look at it. Yep, seems to be in a working order. And then you of course need to read the description and see if it's actually anything bad is happening with it. But it's, by the way, the processor was Ryzen 5, right? So it's a little bit of a weaker processor, but the graphics card is fine and it's not that expensive. So I think this is a pretty good deal, right? Then we have RTX 3080 with Ryzen 7 processor, right? Also $1,000. So this one is actually even better, but I'm not familiar with Electronics Mech 15 company that makes this. I assume this is some sort of a Chinese brand. Let's search. Delaware. Okay, American brand. Okay. Anyway, so here we have an American laptop, which seems to be a-okay. Anyway, so that's how we search for a laptop here, and we skip over, for example, Lenovo ThinkPad. So this one most likely will not have a graphics card, right? Because it's not listed here, the graphics card. And if I scroll down here, yeah, graphics processing type, integrated onboard graphics, that is garbage. That means as I said before, the processor, the Core i7, this processor also takes care of the graphics, which means that everything is just slow. And this particular laptop is a no-go, right? If you don't see a graphics card listed, you run away from it. You want your RTX graphics card. So that is how you search for either used or new laptops. You just filter them out. Actually, let me just show you how I filter for the new laptops as well, just so that we're on the same page. I could have done an Amazon listing, but in this case, I'll just use a generic Swedish laptop store, a store where you can buy laptops, right? So I just go for computers. We find laptop computers, and here you see the Chromebooks, the business workstation, and so on. I don't really care which one it is, as long as it fits my needs, during the filtering, right? So first of all, the memory, I just crank it up to 32 minimum. Then the price, for some reason it's in Norwegian crowns, I don't know, don't really care. So if I'm buying a laptop in this shop, probably I don't want it to be higher than like 25,000 crowns, which is $2,600, $2,500, something like that. And then we have processor type. So I'll just do Core i7, Core 7, Core i9, Core Ultra 7, Ultra 9, Ryzen 7. Actually, and then we have the Snapdragon X Elite. Oh, and then we have the Snapdragon X Elite. We don't use that. That's the Qualcomm one. We don't want those, right? And all of these other ones have been filtered out by default, simply because there's no laptops that have that amount of RAM and that use Core i3 processor, right? So let me go back in here, just yoink. What else? Graphics cards, of course. RTX 4050. 4050 is pretty low end. At this point, I would kind of start looking into a used laptop market or a little bit older graphics cards. So I'm gonna say 4070, 4060, and that's it, because here we have our Intel and here we have our AMD. So either 4060 or 4070, and that's it. And now we look at what's the highest discount, right? For these laptops. So 10%, 29%. Okay. Is that the highest? Sure. And that's where we start, looking from, where we begin looking. i9, 32 gigs of RAM, GeForce RTX 4060. Sure. Let's take a look at it. Screen. Anything about the screen? Always search for specifications. Brightness 250. Instead of I mentioned 350 for me is the limit. It's too dim to work outside. Still, I mean, for the price, for this price, is it worth it? Maybe, because you would have an external monitor either way, and then you would just need to deal with a pretty dim monitor. The color accuracy seems to be good. There's no HDR, it's lying to you. Color accuracy seems to be pretty good. It's a gaming laptop, so it does insane refresh rate for hertz. You don't care about that. 32 gigs of RAM is absolutely fine. Core i9 is a beast of a CPU. SSD 1 terabyte, that's plenty of storage. Then we have NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4060. That's a decent graphics card, will be enough. Yeah. So just to give you an idea, this is 2,000 crowns. Let's go back and let's see, back again, and see the cheapest possible laptop that we can get. Cheapest at the top, there we go, compare. Is that compare? Shouldn't be compare. Oh, it's already cheapest at the top. MSI Katana. Okay, so these guys are really thin. Or wait, it was Katana Blade. Anyway, these MSI laptops, if I remember correctly, either they're thin or they're very plasticky. One of those. Looks very gamey, which is not great, but 18,000 crowns. So it's not that cheap. Anyway, sorry. I'm now just blabbing and just going through the laptops. 300, a little bit closer to our limit of 350, so it's getting there. Anyway, that's how you search online, right? And then that those are the filters that you add. So with all of this being said, the one thing that I want to mention is that, of course, in almost every school, definitely in Lund University, you will have access to school's computers, right? And especially during your first year of education, the need to work on your own laptop will not be high. At every year, the need will keep increasing, but during your first year, it's not that high. So if you don't really have either the money or if you're not ready to purchase a laptop just yet, then don't. Then just use the school's computers and it's gonna be fine. But if you do want to purchase, a laptop, then hopefully this video has been informative and will help you out in, making a decision. Thanks for watching, I guess. Bye.